I watched from my kitchen window as the construction crew rolled onto my back field at 6 in the morning, their heavy machinery tearing up the wildflowers my late wife had planted 15 years ago. My name is Wesley Quinn, and I had inherited this property in rural Virginia from my parents back in 2018. The house sat on 12 acres of rolling land just outside of Charlottesville, with 8 of those acres stretching out behind the main residence in a beautiful open field. My wife Sarah had loved that field. We used to have picnics there every Sunday during the summer months, and she had scattered wildflower seeds across the entire expanse, creating this gorgeous natural meadow that bloomed purple and yellow every spring. She passed away 3 years ago from cancer, and that field had become my way of keeping her memory alive. The construction crew didn't seem to care about any of that. I grabbed my coffee mug and rushed outside in my slippers, still wearing my pajama pants and a faded University of Virginia sweatshirt. The morning air was crisp, typical for early March in Virginia, and I could see my breath as I jogged toward the machines. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted over the roar of a bulldozer. A man in a hard hat and reflective vest turned toward me, clipboard in hand. He looked annoyed at the interruption. "We're clearing this lot for the new parking area. Are you one of the residents?" "Resident. I own this property. This is my land." The man's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. He flipped through some papers on his clipboard, squinting at them in the early morning light. "This is 2847 Meadowbrook Lane, right? The HOA contracted us to build a community parking lot here." "I live at 2847 Meadowbrook Lane, yes, but I'm not part of any HOA. This is private property, and you need to get your machines off my land right now." The foreman held up a hand, gesturing for his crew to pause. The bulldozer went quiet, and suddenly I could hear birds chirping in the oak trees that lined the eastern edge of my property. "Look, sir, I don't know what to tell you. We've got a signed contract from the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. They own this parcel according to our paperwork." "They absolutely do not own this parcel. I have the deed in my house. This has been in my family for 40 years. The foreman scratched his head under his hard hat. "Well, we can't proceed if there's a property dispute. Let me call my boss." He pulled out his phone and walked away, leaving me standing there in my slippers among the torn-up wildflowers. I went back inside to grab my property deed from the filing cabinet in my office. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the thick folder containing all my property documents. Sure enough, there it was, clear as day. The deed showed I owned 12 acres at this address, with the exact boundaries marked on the attached survey map. The backfield was definitely, unquestionably mine. By the time I got back outside, a silver Lexus had pulled up alongside the construction vehicles. Out stepped a woman who looked to be in her mid-50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, and an expression of supreme irritation. She wore a beige pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "What seems to be the problem here?" she demanded. Not even looking at me, the foreman gestured in my direction. "This gentleman says he owns this property and that we don't have permission to build here." The woman finally turned to face me, looking me up and down with undisguised disdain. I was suddenly very aware that I was still in my pajamas. "I'm Karen Whitmore, president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. This land belongs to the association, and we have every right to develop it for community use." "No, Karen, this land belongs to me. I have the deed right here." I held up the folder. She waved a dismissive hand. "That's impossible. The HOA purchased this parcel 6 months ago specifically for this parking lot project. Our community desperately needs additional parking for guest vehicles and service providers. You purchased what exactly? Because I sure as hell didn't sell you anything. Karen pulled out her phone with manicured nails painted a bright red. I have all the documentation in my car. The previous owner sold us this land fair and square. If you live at the address on Meadowbrook Lane, you're part of this community whether you like it or not, and you're subject to our bylaws and decisions. Lady, I am the owner. There is no previous owner. My parents built this house in 1985 and I inherited it 7 years ago. Nobody sold you anything. Her expression faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. Well, I'll need to review your supposed documentation. I'm quite certain our records are correct. I handed her the folder, and she pulled out the deed with the same careful delicacy someone might use to handle a dead rat. She read through it, her lips pursing tighter and tighter as she went. The foreman stood nearby, clearly wanting no part of this dispute. This must be forged, she finally declared, though her voice lacked conviction. It's not forged, Karen. It's a certified copy from the county recorder's office. See the seal. You can call them yourself if you don't believe me. She pulled out her own folder from her Lexus and started comparing documents. I watched as the color slowly drained from her face. There's been some kind of mistake, she muttered. You think, I said, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. The HOA was assured by our real estate consultant that this parcel was available and belonged to the community space designated in the original development plans. Well, your real estate consultant screwed up. This was never part of any development. My parents bought this as raw land and built our house here before any of those cookie-cutter houses in your neighborhood even existed. Karen's face was now shifting from pale to red. Do you have any idea how much money we've already spent on this project? We've paid for surveys, permits, engineering consultations, and now construction crews. The association has invested nearly $50,000. That sounds like a you problem, not a me problem. Don't you dare take that tone with me. I am the president of this HOA, and I have certain authorities and responsibilities to this community. Authorities that don't extend to my private property, I shot back. The foreman cleared his throat. So, should we pack up then? Karen spun on him. No, we're not packing up. This is clearly just a misunderstanding that will be resolved shortly. Mr. Quinn here probably doesn't understand property law or community development regulations. I understand them fine. What I understand is that you're trespassing, and if those machines aren't off my land in the next 10 minutes, I'm calling the sheriff. The sheriff? Karen actually laughed. Randy Thompson and I play tennis every Thursday. Good luck with that. Try me, I said, pulling out my phone. She stared at me for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if I was bluffing. I wasn't. I started dialing the non-emergency number for the Albemarle County Sheriff's Office. Fine, Karen snapped. We'll pause construction for today while I sort this out with our lawyers. But I can guarantee you, Mr. Quinn, that this is far from over. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA has never lost a property dispute, and we're not about to start now. She turned to the foreman. Pack up your equipment for today. We'll resume once this silly confusion is cleared up. The construction crew looked relieved to be leaving. Within 30 minutes, they had loaded up their machinery and driven off, leaving behind torn-up earth and destroyed wildflowers. I stood in the middle of the damage, feeling sick to my stomach. Sarah's meadow was ruined. I spent the rest of that day calling lawyers. Most of them didn't want to touch an HOA dispute, saying those cases were messy and time-consuming. Finally, I got connected with a property attorney named Marcus Chen who had an office in downtown Charlottesville. He agreed to see me the next morning. Marcus's office was in a converted historic building on the downtown mall. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his late 30s, with sharp eyes and an efficient manner. I laid out all my documents on his conference table, and he examined each one carefully. "This is pretty straightforward," Marcus said after about 20 minutes. "You clearly own this property. The question is how the HOA got the idea they could build there. They said something about a real estate consultant and original development plans." Marcus nodded, making notes on a legal pad. "Meadowbrook Hills was developed in the late 90s, right? There might have been some confusion because your property sits adjacent to the subdivision. Sometimes these HOA boards get overly aggressive about what they think they control. So what do I do? First, I'll draft a cease and desist letter outlining your ownership and demanding they not return to your property. Second, we'll file a quiet title action to definitively establish your ownership in court. And third, if they've already pulled permits for construction, we need to alert the county that those permits were obtained under false pretenses." "How long will this take?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Could be a few months. Could be longer if they decide to fight it." HOAs can be stubborn, especially when they've already invested money into a project. "And how much is this going to cost me?" "I'll be honest with you, Wesley. Fighting an HOA with a legal war chest could run you anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000, depending on how far they push it." I felt my stomach drop. I was a retired high school history teacher living on a pension. Sarah's medical bills had wiped out most of our savings. I didn't have $30,000 to spend on lawyers. Marcus must have seen the expression on my face. "Let me send the cease and desist first." Sometimes that's enough to make them back down once they realize they've made a genuine mistake. "We'll hope for the best." I left his office feeling anxious and angry. This wasn't fair. I hadn't done anything wrong, but now I was going to have to spend money. I didn't have to defend property that was unquestionably mine. The cease and desist letter went out 2 days later via certified mail. I got a notification that Karen Whitmore had signed for it on a Friday afternoon. I figured I'd hear something by Monday. I was wrong. Monday came and went with silence. So did Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery again. I couldn't believe it. I threw on actual clothes this time and ran outside to find the same construction crew back on my field, along with Karen Whitmore standing next to her Lexus with her arms crossed. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted as I approached. "You got the cease and desist letter." Karen gave me a cold smile. "I received a letter from some lawyer making baseless accusations. Yes. Our HOA attorney has reviewed the situation and determined that we are well within our rights to proceed. This land was designated as community space in the original Meadowbrook Hills development plans filed with the county in 1997. In 1997, I was already living here. My parents built this house in 1985. Your house, perhaps, but this field was always meant to be community space. The developer simply never got around to filing the proper paperwork before going bankrupt. We're correcting that oversight now." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the sheriff. You're trespassing." "Go ahead," Karen said coolly. "As I mentioned, Randy and I are quite close. I'm sure he'll straighten out this misunderstanding." I called anyway. The dispatcher said she'd send a deputy out. While we waited, the construction crew stood around awkwardly, clearly not wanting to be in the middle of this dispute, but also not wanting to defy their client. Deputy Sheriff Tom Crawford arrived about 20 minutes later. He was a stocky guy in his 40s with a thick mustache and a tired expression. "What seems to be the problem here?" Karen immediately launched into her explanation, painting me as a confused homeowner who didn't understand property boundaries and community development law. I tried to interrupt several times, but she just talked over me. When she finally stopped to take a breath, I handed Deputy Crawford my property deed. This is my land. It's been my land for decades. They have no right to be here. Crawford examined the deed, then looked at Karen. Madam, do you have documentation showing the HOA owns this property? Our attorney has all the relevant documents. This is a complex legal matter involving community development rights and original subdivision planning. We have every legal right to be here. Crawford scratched his jaw. Here's the thing. If there's a genuine property dispute, that's a civil matter for the courts. I can't force anybody off land if ownership is unclear. Ownership isn't unclear, I protested. I have the deed right here. You have a deed, sure. But if they're claiming other rights to the property, a judge needs to sort that out. I'm sorry, sir, but my hands are tied on civil disputes. So they can just come onto my property and tear it up, and you won't do anything. Crawford looked uncomfortable. I'd advise both parties to avoid the property until the courts settle the ownership question. If you proceed with construction, madam, and a judge later rules against you, you could be liable for damages. And if you try to physically stop them, sir, you could be charged with assault or interfering with lawful work. Karen smiled triumphantly. Thank you, Deputy Crawford. Always a pleasure. After Crawford left, I stood there feeling helpless as the machines roared to life again. I called Marcus Chen immediately. They're back on your property right now. Marcus sounded shocked. Yeah, and the sheriff's deputy basically said it's a civil matter and he can't help. Technically, he's not wrong, but this is aggressive even for an HOA. Let me file for an emergency injunction. We can get in front of a judge as early as tomorrow if we're lucky. Do it, I said. Marcus worked fast. By that evening, he'd filed the emergency motion. We got a hearing scheduled for Friday morning, 2 days away. In the meantime, the construction crew worked 12-hour days on my field. By Thursday evening, they'd cleared and graded the entire 8 acres. Sarah's wildflowers were completely gone, replaced by bare earth. I barely slept Thursday night. Friday morning, I put on the only suit I owned, a dark blue one I'd bought for Sarah's funeral, and met Marcus at the Albemarle County Courthouse. The hearing was in front of Judge Patricia Holloway, a severe-looking woman in her 60s who had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. Karen showed up with the HOA's attorney, a slick guy named Douglas Pritchard who wore a suit that probably cost more than my car. Marcus presented our case first, walking Judge Holloway through my deed, the survey maps, and the chain of title going back decades. It was clear, straightforward, and unambiguous. Then Pritchard stood up and started talking about community development rights and implied easements and original subdivision intent. He pulled out planning documents from 1997 that showed a vague blob labeled community green space that he claimed included my field. Judge Holloway studied the documents carefully, going back and forth between my deed and their planning maps. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Pritchard, these planning documents don't show specific property boundaries or parcel numbers. They appear to be conceptual drawings. Your Honor, the intent was clear that this area would serve the community. Intent isn't ownership, Counselor. Mr. Quinn has a recorded deed with specific metes and bounds. Do you have a competing deed or any document showing the HOA actually owns this parcel? Pritchard hesitated. We have community development rights based on the original subdivision plans. That's not what I asked. Do you have a deed? No, Your Honor, but we believe. Then you're trespassing on Mr. Quinn's property. Judge Holloway's voice was sharp. I'm granting the injunction. The HOA is hereby ordered to immediately cease all construction activities on the property located at 2847 Meadowbrook Lane. Furthermore, I'm scheduling a full hearing on the quiet title action for 6 weeks from now. If the HOA cannot produce clear documentation of ownership by that time, I'll permanently enjoin them from the property, and Mr. Quinn can pursue damages for the destruction that's already occurred. Karen stood up in the gallery. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. Our community needs..." "Sit down, Miss Whitmore. You'll have your chance to present evidence at the full hearing." Judge Holloway banged her gavel. "We're adjourned." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Marcus shook my hand as we left the courtroom. That went as well as we could have hoped. Unless they can produce a miracle document in the next 6 weeks, you'll win the quiet title action. And then what? Then you'll have clear title. They'll be permanently barred from your property, and you can sue them for damages to repair your field. Karen and Pritchard were having a heated conversation in the hallway. I caught Karen's eye as we passed, and the look she gave me could have melted steel. Over the next 6 weeks, I heard nothing from the HOA. The construction equipment disappeared from my field, leaving behind acres of torn-up, bare dirt. Every time I looked at it, I felt sick. Sarah's meadow was gone. The full hearing arrived in late April. This time, it was a longer session with both sides presenting detailed arguments. Pritchard brought in a supposed expert on subdivision law who tried to argue about implied development rights. Marcus brought in a title company representative who confirmed my ownership was clean and clear. Judge Holloway didn't look impressed by the HOA's arguments. After 3 hours of testimony, she ruled from the bench. The court finds that Wesley Quinn is the sole legal owner of the property at 2847 Meadowbrook Lane, including all 12 acres as described in his deed. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA has no ownership interest in this property. The injunction is made permanent, and the HOA is ordered to pay Mr. Quinn's attorney fees in the amount of $12,000. Mr. Quinn, you're free to pursue additional damages in a separate action. I felt like I could finally breathe again. Marcus and I celebrated with lunch at a restaurant on the downtown mall. "You should definitely pursue damages for the destruction of your field," he advised. "They tore up 8 acres. That's going to cost real money to restore." "How much do you think I could get?" "Hard to say. Depends on what you want to do with it. Reseeding, grading, soil amendments, probably looking at $20,000 to $40,000 in damages." I thought about it over the weekend. The more I looked at that bare dirt, the angrier I got. They destroyed something precious to me, something irreplaceable. Sarah's wildflowers were gone. No amount of money would bring them back, but maybe I could at least make them pay for what they'd done. Monday morning, I called Marcus to tell him I wanted to pursue the damages case. But before I could say anything, he spoke first. "Wesley, I was just about to call you. Something interesting happened. The HOA wants to settle." "Settle? Why would they want to settle now?" I think Judge Holloway's ruling spooked them. "If you sue for damages, a jury might award you significantly more than they want to pay. They're offering $40,000 to make this go away." $40,000. That was more than I'd expected. It would cover Marcus's fees that the HOA hadn't been ordered to pay, restore my field, and leave some left over. What do you think I should do? Honestly, take it. Going to trial is expensive and uncertain. This is a good offer. I agreed to the settlement. The HOA cut me a check for $40,000, and in return, I agreed not to pursue any further legal action. The money arrived in early May, and I immediately started getting quotes for field restoration. That's when I had an idea. A really satisfying idea. The HOA had already done most of the hard work. They'd cleared and graded 8 acres of land. The ground was level and compacted. All it would need was a layer of asphalt, some striping, and maybe some lighting. What if I let them finish their parking lot project right there on my property? And then what if I charged them rent for it? I called Marcus back. How much could I charge for parking lot rent? He was quiet for a moment. Why are you asking? I explained my idea. Marcus actually laughed. That's diabolical. I love it. Let me do some research. He called me back the next day with numbers. Commercial parking lot rent in this area runs about $4,000 to $6,000 per acre per year, depending on location and amenities. You've got 8 acres. We're talking $30,000 to $50,000 annually. And there's nothing illegal about this. Not a thing. It's your property. If they want to use it for parking, you can charge whatever rent you want. Of course, they'd have to agree to rent it from you. What if they don't know they're renting it until after it's built? Marcus paused. Walk me through what you're thinking. What if I don't stop them? What if they assume they can still build their parking lot because I took the settlement money and I just let them pave my field? Then, once it's done and the HOA residents are using it, I inform them they're trespassing and offer to rent it to them. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. That's risky. If they build on your property without permission, you could sue for damages again. But if you knowingly allow them to build, you might be seen as giving implicit permission. What if I'm just not around? What if I take a vacation right after I cash the settlement check? And then I come back and oh my, look what they built on my property without asking. Marcus laughed again. I can't officially advise you to do that, but I can tell you that if improvements are made to your property without your knowledge or consent, you would have every right to demand rent for their use or demand their removal. Could they just remove the parking lot? Sure, if they want to rip up thousands of dollars worth of asphalt and restore your field to its original condition, which would cost them even more money. I smiled for the first time in months. I think I need a vacation, maybe a nice long trip, 3 or 4 weeks. Funny thing, Wesley. I don't think I'm going to be able to reach you for the next month. My calls will probably go straight to voicemail. Technology is so unreliable these days. I cashed the settlement check and immediately booked a month-long trip to visit my sister in Oregon. I'd been meaning to see her anyway, and this seemed like the perfect time. Before I left, I put up a small "No Trespassing" sign on a tree at the edge of my property, right where my field met the road. Nothing aggressive, just a standard sign from the hardware store. I left for Oregon on May 15th. My sister Emily picked me up from the Portland airport, and we spent a wonderful few weeks hiking, visiting wineries, and catching up on lost time. I didn't check my voicemail. I didn't respond to emails. I was completely, blissfully unreachable. I got back to Virginia on June 10th. As my taxi turned onto Meadowbrook Lane, my heart started pounding. I could see from the road that something had changed. My field was now a parking lot. A complete, finished, professional parking lot. They'd paved all 8 acres with fresh black asphalt. They'd painted clean white lines marking out spaces, easily 200 of them. They'd installed tall LED light poles every 50 feet. There was a decorative brick entrance with a sign that read Meadowbrook Hills Community Parking and landscaping with small shrubs and flowers. It was beautiful. It probably cost them $200,000 or more, and it was all on my property. I paid the taxi driver and walked onto the parking lot. Several cars were already parked there. I recognized some of them from the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision. People were actually using it. I went inside my house and finally checked my voicemail. I had 47 messages. Most were from Karen Whitmore, starting friendly about 2 weeks into my trip and progressively getting more frantic and angry. Message 1, dated May 22nd. Mr. Quinn, this is Karen Whitmore from the HOA. I wanted to inform you that we've decided to proceed with our parking lot project after all. Since you accepted the settlement, we consider the matter closed. The construction will begin next week. I wanted to give you courtesy notice. Message 15, dated May 30th. Mr. Quinn, we've been unable to reach you. The parking lot construction is underway. Please call me back to discuss some drainage issues that affect your property line. Message 32, dated June 6th. Mr. Quinn, where are you? We need to finalize some landscaping details. Call me immediately. Message 47, dated June 9th. Mr. Quinn, this is ridiculous. The parking lot is nearly complete and you've been completely unresponsive. I don't know what game you're playing, but you cashed our settlement check. That's basically your agreement to let this project proceed. Call me back right now. I smiled and deleted all the messages. Then I called Marcus Chen. Welcome back, he said cheerfully. How was Oregon? Beautiful, relaxing. You should see what the HOA built on my property while I was gone. I can't wait to hear all about it. Come by my office tomorrow morning. The next day, I brought Marcus photos of the parking lot. He studied them with undisguised glee. This is even better than I hoped. They went all in. So what do I do now? Now, we send them a letter informing them that they've built a substantial commercial improvement on your property without authorization. We offer them two options: remove it entirely at their expense or lease the property from you. How much should I ask for? Marcus tapped his pen on his desk. 8 acres, full development, prime location near a residential community. I'd say $45,000 per year is reasonable. We can structure it as a 10-year lease with annual increases tied to inflation. $45,000 per year. That's actually on the low end for a developed parking lot this size. But we want to be reasonable. If they refuse, we can always go higher or demand removal. Marcus drafted the letter that afternoon. It was polite but firm. The HOA had built a parking lot on my property without permission or authorization. While I appreciated the quality of their work, they were essentially trespassing. I was willing to lease them the property for $45,000 per year on a 10-year lease, with payment due in full at the beginning of each year. If they preferred, they could remove the parking lot entirely and restore my field to its original condition at their expense. We sent the letter certified mail on June 12th. Karen Whitmore signed for it on June 13th. 2 hours after she signed for it, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Wesley Quinn, you absolute bastard. Karen's voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. You planned this. You set us up. I don't know what you mean, Karen. I went on vacation and came back to find you'd built a parking lot on my property without permission. You knew we were building. I left you messages. I was on vacation. I'm not required to check my messages. And even if I had gotten them, you never asked my permission. You just informed me you were building on my land. You cashed our settlement check. That was your agreement. The settlement was for damages from your previous trespassing. It didn't give you permission to trespass again. I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. $45,000 a year. That's extortion. That's actually quite reasonable for 8 acres of prime developed parking. But if you'd prefer, you can remove the parking lot entirely. I'd be happy with that outcome too. Removing it would cost us over $100,000. Wow, that much. Then I guess the lease is a bargain. We don't have $45,000 per year. The HOA budget is already stretched thin from this construction. That sounds like a you problem, Karen. You have 30 days to decide. Either sign the lease agreement, remove the parking lot, or I'll sue for trespassing and damages. Your choice. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but I felt amazing. After months of being bullied and pushed around, I finally had the upper hand. The next few weeks were quiet. I assumed the HOA was meeting with their lawyers, trying to find a way out of this mess. Marcus assured me they didn't have many options. The law was crystal clear. They'd built on my property without permission, and I was being generous by offering them a lease instead of demanding immediate removal. On July 8th, Marcus called me. The HOA's attorney wants to meet. They're ready to negotiate. We met at Marcus's office. Douglas Pritchard showed up without Karen this time, which I found interesting. He looked tired and defeated. "My client is prepared to accept a lease agreement," he said without preamble. "However, $45,000 per year is simply not feasible for the HOA's budget. We're prepared to offer $20,000 per year." Marcus didn't even look at me before responding. "$45,000 is already below market rate. We're not negotiating down from there." "The HOA doesn't have that kind of money," Pritchard insisted. "Then they should have thought of that before spending hundreds of thousands of dollars building on someone else's property," I said. Pritchard pinched the bridge of his nose. "Look, I'll be honest with you. The HOA spent nearly their entire reserve fund on this parking lot. They don't have $45,000 in liquid assets right now. They can get it from their residents," Marcus suggested. "Special assessment. Do you have any idea how unpopular that would be? We're talking about several $100s per household." I shrugged. "Again, not my problem. You built on my land. Now you pay rent or remove it." Pritchard was quiet for a long moment. "What if we do a structured payment plan? Say $20,000 up front and then monthly payments of $2,100 for the rest of the year." Marcus looked at me. I nodded. "Fine," Marcus said. "But the lease agreement will include a clause that if they miss a single payment, the entire annual amount becomes immediately due and payable. And we want personal guarantees from the HOA board members." Pritchard's eyes widened. "Personal guarantees? That's not standard." "Neither is building a parking lot on someone else's property," I said. "Take it or leave it." He took it. We signed the lease agreement on July 15th. The HOA handed over a check for $20,000, draining what was left of their reserve fund. Karen Whitmore had to personally sign the agreement along with the other 4 board members, making them individually liable if the HOA defaulted. I deposited the check and immediately hired a landscaping company to plant new wildflowers along the edge of my remaining property, where my yard met the new parking lot. It wouldn't be the same as Sarah's original meadow, but it was something. The monthly payments came grudgingly but regularly for the first few months. $2,100 showed up in my account on August 15th, September 15th, and October 15th. But November 15th came and went with no payment. I called Marcus on November 17th. "They missed the payment. I'll send a demand letter. Under the lease terms, they have 5 days to cure the default, or the full amount becomes due immediately." The demand letter went out that afternoon. On November 20th, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Quinn, this is Deborah Morrison. I'm the HOA treasurer." Her voice was shaky, nervous. "I'm calling about the parking lot lease. Your November payment is late." "I know. I wanted to explain the situation. We're having trouble collecting the special assessment from homeowners. A lot of people are refusing to pay." "That's not my problem, Miss Morrison. The lease is with the HOA, not individual homeowners." "I understand, but, Mr. Quinn, if we can't make this payment, the full year's amount becomes due immediately. We don't have $45,000. We barely have $5,000 in our account right now." "Then you're in default. Please, isn't there anything we can do? Can we renegotiate? We already negotiated. You agreed to these terms. If you can't pay, you need to remove the parking lot. That would cost over $100,000. The HOA would have to dissolve. People would lose their homes. I'm sorry to hear that, but none of this is my fault. You built on my property without permission. I've been more than reasonable. She started crying on the phone. Karen told us this would work out. She said you'd never really enforce the lease. She said we'd figure something out. I felt a twinge of sympathy, but I pushed it down. These people had destroyed Sarah's meadow. They'd trespassed on my land repeatedly despite court orders. They'd bullied me and tried to use their money and connections to steamroll over my rights. You have until end of business tomorrow to bring your account current, I said. After that, the full amount is due immediately, and if you can't pay, we'll proceed with eviction and a lawsuit for the full amount plus damages. She hung up without saying goodbye. The next day came and went with no payment. Marcus filed a lawsuit on November 23rd, right before Thanksgiving. We sued the HOA for the full $45,000, plus attorney fees and late charges as specified in the lease. The HOA didn't even fight it. They couldn't afford a lawyer. Pritchard had apparently dropped them as a client once they couldn't pay his bills. On December 10th, Judge Holloway issued a default judgment in my favor for $49,000. Collecting on that judgment was another matter entirely. The HOA had no money. Their bank account had less than $3,000 in it. I could have gone after the board members personally because of their guarantees, but Marcus advised against it. They'll just declare personal bankruptcy, he said. You'll spend more on collection efforts than you'll recover. So what do? You could force the HOA to dissolve and sell off any assets they have. But from what I can tell, they don't own much. Some office equipment, maybe a riding lawnmower for common area maintenance. You might get a few thousand if you're lucky. What about the parking lot itself? Marcus smiled. Now that's an interesting idea. They built it, but it's on your property. You already own it. You could charge for parking. Charge the HOA residents for parking. Why not? It's your parking lot on your property. Post some signs, install a payment kiosk, charge $5 a day or $50 a month. You've got 200 spots. If even half of them get regular use, that's $5,000 a month. I like this idea a lot. I hired a company to install a payment kiosk at the entrance to the parking lot and put up signs announcing that parking was now $5 per day or $50 per month. Residents of Meadowbrook Hills could register their vehicles online and pay through an app. The neighborhood lost its mind. My phone rang constantly with angry residents demanding I remove the parking fees. Someone spray-painted "thief" on my garage door. Karen Whitmore led a group of about 30 people to picket in front of my house, waving signs and chanting about property rights and community values. I called the sheriff. Deputy Crawford showed up again, looking even more tired than before. "Mr. Quinn, what's going on now?" "These people are trespassing on my property and harassing me." Karen pushed forward from the crowd. "We're exercising our First Amendment rights. This man is extorting our community." Crawford held up his hands. "Madam, you need to keep the protest on public property. You can't be on Mr. Quinn's land or blocking his driveway. The parking lot is public property. It was built with HOA funds for community use. The parking lot is on Mr. Quinn's private property, madam. Judge Holloway already ruled on that. If you don't like his parking fees, don't park there. Where else are we supposed to park?" Someone shouted from the crowd. "That's not Mr. Quinn's problem," Crawford said wearily. "Now, I'm going to ask everyone to move back to the public sidewalk. If you refuse, I'll have to start making arrests for trespassing." The crowd grudgingly moved back to the street. They protested for another hour before finally giving up and going home. Karen shot me one last venomous look before climbing into her Lexus and driving away. Despite the protests, people started paying for parking. They didn't have much choice. The Meadowbrook Hills subdivision had been built with minimal street parking, which is why they'd wanted the community lot in the first place. Residents with multiple cars or visitors had nowhere else to park. By January, I had over 70 monthly subscribers paying $50 each. That was $3,500 a month, $42,000 a year. Combined with daily parking fees from visitors and service vehicles, I was pulling in close to $50,000 annually. The HOA held an emergency meeting in February. I wasn't invited, obviously, but one of the residents who'd actually been sympathetic to my situation, a retired accountant named George Peters, called to fill me in. It was chaos, George told me. Karen tried to argue that everyone should keep refusing to pay your parking fees, but most people are tired of fighting. They just want somewhere to park. Then the current treasurer presented the financial report. The HOA is $93,000 in debt between your judgment and unpaid legal bills. They can't pay for basic maintenance anymore. The landscaping company won't mow the common areas because they haven't been paid in 4 months. Are they going to dissolve? They're voting on it next week. Karen is fighting it tooth and nail, but she doesn't have the votes anymore. Most of the board wants to cut their losses. The HOA officially dissolved on February 28th. As part of the dissolution, they had to sell off their few remaining assets. I bought their riding lawnmower for $300 at the liquidation sale, just because I could. With the HOA dissolved, there was no legal entity to sue anymore. My judgment would never be fully paid, but I didn't really care. I was making $50,000 a year from parking fees. My property value had actually increased because of the paved lot, and I'd successfully fought off a bully who tried to steal my land. Karen Whitmore moved out of Meadowbrook Hills in March. I heard through George that she and her husband were getting divorced, partially because of the financial stress from her personal guarantee on the parking lot lease. She'd had to declare bankruptcy to avoid paying the judgment personally. I can't say I felt bad about that. By April, life had settled into a new normal. The parking lot was actually pretty low maintenance. I hired a company to plow it in winter and patch any cracks in summer. The payment kiosk worked automatically, depositing fees directly into my account. I was making more money than I ever had as a teacher, certainly more than my pension provided. One warm evening in May, exactly a year after this whole mess started, I was sitting on my back porch looking out at the parking lot. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Along the border between my yard and the lot, the wildflowers I'd planted were blooming. They weren't the same as Sarah's original meadow, but they were beautiful in their own way. I thought about calling Emily to tell her how things had turned out, but then I figured she'd probably just laugh at the absurdity of it all. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and toasted the empty parking spaces. The next morning, I got a call from Marcus. "I've got someone interested in buying your parking lot. It's not for sale, hear me out. It's a development company that wants to buy the 8-acre parcel. They'd build townhouses on it. They're offering $800,000. I nearly dropped my phone. $800,000. The parking lot added significant value to the property. It's already cleared, paved, and has utilities run to it. That makes it attractive for development. I don't know, Marcus. I've kind of gotten used to things the way they are. Think about it. That's life-changing money. You could invest it, travel, do whatever you want. You've made your point with the parking lot." He was right, of course. $800,000 was more money than I'd probably earned from parking fees in 15 years. It was financial security for the rest of my life. But something made me hesitate. This parking lot had become a symbol of standing up for myself, of not being pushed around by people with more money and power. Selling it felt like giving that up. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Sure. The offer is good for 30 days. I spent the next week wrestling with the decision. Finally, I called Emily to talk it through. "Sell it," she said immediately. "Wesley, you've proven your point. You beat them. Now take the money and enjoy your life. Sarah would want you to be happy, not running a parking lot out of spite." She was right. Sarah would have found this whole situation hilarious, but she also would have told me to take the money and move on. I called Marcus back on June 1st. "I'll take the offer." The sale closed in August. After taxes and fees, I walked away with about $600,000. I invested most of it in a diversified portfolio that would provide steady income for the rest of my life. With the investment income plus my pension, I was more financially comfortable than I'd ever been. The development company broke ground on the townhouses in September. They kept some of the parking lot infrastructure, but reconfigured most of it for the new buildings. Watching them tear up the asphalt felt strangely satisfying, like a final chapter closing. George Peters invited me to a neighborhood gathering in October. Apparently, with the HOA dissolved, the residents had formed a loose neighborhood association instead, without any legal power or mandatory fees. They just got together occasionally for cookouts and to coordinate on things like snow plowing. I almost didn't go, but something made me change my mind. I brought a case of beer and showed up on a Saturday afternoon. The reception was mixed. Some people were still clearly angry about the parking fee situation. Others seemed to respect that I'd stood my ground. A few younger residents who'd moved in recently had no idea who I was or what had happened. George introduced me around, and eventually, I ended up in a conversation with a woman named Jennifer who'd been on the HOA board during the parking lot debacle. "I want to apologize," she said quietly. "I went along with Karen's plans even though I had doubts. We never should have built on your property without being absolutely certain we owned it. The whole thing was a disaster." "I appreciate that," I said. For what it's worth, getting rid of the HOA was probably the best thing that happened to this neighborhood. The fees were getting ridiculous, and Karen was on a power trip. Now people just handle their own properties and help each other out when needed. It's actually kind of nice. I stayed at the gathering for a couple of hours, and by the end, I felt like I'd made some peace with the neighborhood. These were just regular people who'd been caught up in HOA drama they didn't fully understand. Karen had been the problem, not them. As I was leaving, George walked me to my car. "You know, you could have destroyed this whole neighborhood if you'd wanted to. You showed a lot of restraint." "I just wanted what was mine," I said, "and maybe to teach a lesson about respecting other people's property rights." "Well, lesson learned. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're our neighbor." I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. The whole ordeal had been stressful and infuriating, but in the end, justice had prevailed. I'd protected my property, stood up to bullies, and come out ahead financially. The townhouses were completed the following spring. They were actually quite nice, modern, and well designed. The development company had incorporated some green space and even planted wildflowers similar to the ones I had along my property line. It wasn't the same as Sarah's original meadow, but it was a fitting tribute. I started dating again that summer. Nothing serious at first, just casual dinners and movies with a woman named Linda who I'd met at a local book club. She knew the whole parking lot saga because, apparently, everyone in Charlottesville knew about it by then. It had become a local legend, The story of the HOA that built a parking lot on the wrong property and went bankrupt for their trouble. Linda thought it was hilarious. "You're famous," she told me over dinner one night. "You're the guy who bankrupted an HOA." "That wasn't really my goal," I said. "I just wanted them off my land." "Well, you succeeded, spectacularly." We dated for about 6 months before deciding we were better as friends, but it felt good to be putting myself out there again. Sarah had been gone for 4 years now, and while I'd never stopped missing her, I was finally ready to move forward with my life. I used some of the money from the land sale to set up a scholarship fund at the high school where I'd taught. The Wesley and Sarah Quinn Memorial Scholarship, awarded annually to a student pursuing a degree in history or education. It felt like a good way to honor Sarah's memory and give back to the community. By the time the second anniversary of the parking lot's completion rolled around, the whole incident felt like a distant memory. The townhouses were fully occupied, the neighborhood had moved on, and I was living comfortably off my investments. I ran into Douglas Pritchard, the HOA's former attorney, at a coffee shop in downtown Charlottesville one morning. He recognized me and came over to my table. "Mr. Quinn, I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk to me." "It's fine. That was all business." He sat down with his coffee. "I wanted to say, for what it's worth, you were absolutely in the right. Karen Whitmore was impossible to work with. She insisted we could win that case, even when all the evidence showed otherwise. I should have pushed back harder, but she was a paying client." "What happened to her?" "Last I heard, she moved to Florida. Divorced, bankrupt, and not speaking to most of her former friends here. The HOA situation destroyed her reputation." "That's rough." "She did it to herself," Pritchard said. "In all my years practicing law, I've never seen anyone so determined to fight an unwinnable case. You tried to settle multiple times, and she just kept doubling down. Pride is expensive." "That it is." He stood up to leave. "Anyway, I'm glad you came out ahead. Not every property rights case ends with justice being served." After he left, I sat there thinking about Karen. Part of me felt sorry for her. She'd lost everything over a parking lot dispute. But then I remembered how she'd tried to steamroll over me, how she'd used her connections and money to try to take my land, how she'd destroyed Sarah's meadow without a second thought. No, I didn't feel that sorry for her. I finished my coffee and walked home, enjoying the warm sunshine and clear blue sky. Life was good. I had financial security, good friends, a neighborhood that had finally accepted me, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd stood up for myself when it mattered most. The whole parking lot saga had taught me something important. Sometimes the people who seem most powerful and intimidating are actually standing on shaky ground. Sometimes fighting back is worth it, even when it seems easier to just give in. And sometimes karma works in mysterious and profitable ways. I never saw Karen Whitmore again. The neighborhood continued to thrive without an HOA, with residents taking personal responsibility for their properties and cooperating voluntarily when needed. The townhouses brought in younger families who added energy and diversity to the community. And me. I lived comfortably in the house my parents built, surrounded by wildflowers and good memories, with enough money to do whatever I wanted in my retirement. The HOA tried to build a parking lot on my field. I let them pave it, charged them rent, and watched them collapse under the financial weight of their own arrogance and bad decisions. In the end, I sold that lot for a fortune and used the money to build a better life. Sometimes standing up for yourself pays off in ways you never imagined. Sometimes the people who try to push you around end up destroying themselves. And sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys actually win. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to Sarah, to justice, and to the most profitable parking lot dispute in Albemarle County history. Then I walked home to start another beautiful day in the house that had always been mine, on the land that would always be mine, no matter how many HOA presidents tried to claim otherwise. The story of how a homeowners association built a parking lot on my property and ended up bankrupt because of it became a cautionary tale in Virginia legal circles. Marcus told me he'd heard it referenced in property law classes at the University of Virginia. Real estate attorneys used it as an example of what not to do when dealing with boundary disputes. I even got contacted by a local news station wanting to do a feature story, but I declined. I'd had enough attention. Besides, the best part of the whole experience wasn't the money or the small slice of fame. It was knowing that when someone with more power and resources tried to take what was mine, I'd fought back and won. That knowledge was worth more than any parking lot rent could ever be.